when I was 19, I left England and got a job as an au pair. This is after college, so I'd done all my A-levels. And I got a job as an au pair, which is like a nanny, for an American family in Germany. At that time I had anorexia and bulimia, so I used to eat maybe an apple a week, and it was because of trauma, and the trauma that I'm not going to go into. I've said about my baby trauma, how one of my earliest memories is waking up in traction in a hospital, because my father had broke my leg in 3 places, which is very hard to do if you're 3 years old. You haven't really got proper needs, so your joints are very bendy and flexible. So one of my earliest memories was waking up in hospital, one of my legs in traction, next to a little boy who had both legs in traction, and he'd been kicked by a cow, bless him. Anyway, I hate saying that word, bless, but it's a habit. I'm trying not to say that. Anyway, so I'd had that trauma as a child, and my father's presence in my life, and I had other traumas that I don't want to discuss on here. I think I have friends and family following this, so I don't really want to air dirty laundry that's already been aired once before, Anyway, so I had anorexia when I arrived in Germany, and I just needed to be anonymous, and that's why I moved away. And I was so used to working with little children because I had 5 little brothers and sisters. So me working with 2 little children was, a piece of cake. And I enjoyed working with those 2 little girls, They were sweet. And I lived in the house. Actually, excuse me, it was military. It was a military flat. But it was off base in southern Germany, in Bayern, Bavaria. And anyway, I lived in the basement. It was pretty gross, actually. Cockroaches and all sorts. And in the basement is where all the utility rooms were, like washer dryers, etc. The big old American washers and dryers, those good things. But yeah, and when I met my husband, curiously, in a nightclub called Uncle Poe's. Whatever. It was a nightclub called Uncle Poe's, and it had the dance floor the size of a postage stamp, literally. And I used to really laugh at the Germans, because back then they had no rhythm and they couldn't dance, but the Americans could. So the Americans always stood out, and all the German women really liked Americans, and they wanted to go to America, whereas I never really did want to go to America. I had my own plans. I was just going to stay in Germany rather, for a year, and then maybe do some more travelling, maybe some more studying. My plan was not to find a husband and settle down. But when I met him, I wasn't even that bothered by him. I wasn't that taken by him, but I shall never forget my ex-husband saying to me, "Oh, I'm a Grindel. I come from, the Beowulf fame, Grindel the monster." I was like, right. And he said, it's Welsh originally. Welsh. I was like, okay, well, you don't sound Welsh. Back then, I didn't realise how much Americans were so mixed. Anyway, after time, we got married. I won't tell you the in-between bits, doesn't matter. And he'd already been married before to a French Canadian. And he got divorced. And we married in Denmark. So we had about a 5-minute ceremony in Roskilde, Denmark, which is curious to me. And probably 6 months into our first year of marriage, he gets told he's basically going to a 6-week rehab. So in Nuremberg, of all places, Nuremberg, Germany. And he had a bit of a drink problem, but he wasn't an alcoholic. He just had an addictive personality, and he was an energy vampire. So my first, what's supposed to be my honeymoon period is not my honeymoon period at all. I spent 3 weeks in Nuremberg because as a spouse, you're obliged to spend 3 weeks with your spouse. So, it was basically 3 weeks of MK Ultra programming. They tried to hypnotise us as well. I refused, but I sat in on it in the end, and just me and another guy couldn't be hypnotised. And anyway, he came out of rehab, which it was a bizarre experience for me. I was thinking to myself, what the fuck's going on here? He came out of rehab and he traded alcohol and drugs for AA meetings. So I lost my husband to AA meetings, so my respect levels were kind of dropping dramatically, especially as he wasn't very open and communicative with me. And I found out after we got married that he'd been raped 3 times by his previous commanding officer in Oklahoma, where he was stationed before. So that's the sort of information you tell your spouse before you get married. So that that caused major problems, but it was his sympathy card for our whole relationship. I don't want this to go on too long. I've already chatted for 7 minutes. I was going to take you through my album as I was talking, but I get too distracted speaking. Anyhow, I think I'll have to do several parts to this, but that's basically the first sort of year of my marriage. And then after that, because of his job in the military, he was in the US Army. He was a sergeant by that point, an NCO, so he's not an officer. He's a non-commissioned officer, sergeant. So, not particularly high rank or anything, but we made good money back then. I worked for the US government as a German national. So I was earning Deutschmarks and he was earning dollars. And back then, the dollars to Deutschmark rate was high. So, we had basically 3 to 4 wages coming in, essentially. Anyhow, so he worked as a nuclear specialist. And because of the chemicals he worked with, allegedly, he got something called pulmonary sarcoidosis, which is a fibrosis of the organ. So a tissue that grows on a tissue and it weakens the organ. So he got pulmonary sarcoidosis, which apparently is very rare for white people. But if you look at his bloodline, he's not white at all. So, he had to take prednisone, which is a steroid that made him blow up like Mr. Blobby. So he went from being a fit soldier to being 250 pounds of just chemical, I don't know what you call that. It's like it inflated him almost. It's just awful. I mean, it's hard for him too, but he was very sick. By this time also my daughter had been born, but I think it's probably time to stop there because I don't want this to go on too long. So I'm just trying to give some context to some of my posts because somebody asked me to. So that's what I'm trying to do. Hope this isn't boring the pants off you.